If I can do it, yeah. I'm trying to pull back. Oh, maybe I will go to the podium. Is that working? Ladies and gentlemen, seats. We're getting ready to get started. Okay, we have a few bits of housekeeping, some notes we'd like to take care of before we even get rolling this morning. We would like to remind you, as we told you at the registration desk, your badge must be on your lanyard and on you at all times. And that just kind of reminds us and lets us know that you're supposed to be here. And this is just an element of security. We'd like to keep everything organized and kind of have a head count and know where everybody's at and what they're doing. And if you see somebody wandering around without a badge, if you could let myself know, my name is Jennifer, or one of the other volunteers, or Laura or Karen, that would be extraordinarily helpful. We would also ask that at this time, you turn off your cell phone ringers, unless of course you happen to have the exact same ringtone as Baldwin. That's acceptable. I'm now going to hand the mic over to our organizers, and they're going to share a few words with you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. Good morning, and welcome to the second All Souls Con. So we have fellow fans also from 31 countries who are joining us via live stream. So welcome to everyone joining us.
A humongous thank you goes to Penguin Books for allowing us to bring the live stream at no charge to everybody online around the world. And also for the wonderful attendee bag. I hope you took a peek and you liked it.
And also, just here in New Orleans, there are 31 countries, but
31 worldwide.
Yeah, 31 worldwide. But no, here we have also we have representations from 3 different countries, which are.
I would like to ask anybody from Canada to please stand up. And we have a couple of people that flew in all the way from the United Kingdom. Please stand up. If you're from the USA, no need to stand up.
You're fine. You're fine.
But we do have people from 30 states. So
we do.
Amazing.
Yay! And we'd also like to give a special welcome to all our alumni. So everyone who was here in Los Angeles in 2015, a big round of applause to everyone.
Everybody that was in LA and also watched the online, the live stream 2 years ago, please stand up. You got it. Thank you for coming.
Yes, and also a special, humongous thank you to all our volunteers. You guys are amazing. Without you guys, this would not be possible. So thank you.
So super quickly, we're gonna time walk to November of last year when we got an email from Deb's publicist, the wonderful Siobhan Olsen. That's where the beginning of this was the beginning of the journey for us. So we've been working on this.
And dreaming, everything.
The
Yes.
dream came true today.
So, thank you. And then so we have
a day filled with a lot of excitement and a lot of surprises. Get ready. And talking about excitement, I actually meant that literally.
So straight from the set of A Discovery of Witches, we have a message from Teresa Palmer and Matthew Good for everyone. Ready? And oh. It's coming.
G'day, All Souls,
Sorry.
friends. Oh, and hello there. It's a member of our crew.
We have so many.
We have lots of people here because we are making a TV show.
All Souls trilogy.
That's right.
If it's good, the first season, we don't know. We'd love to get to the third season, fourth
Yes.
season, good season.
Spread the word,
Fingers
guys.
crossed.
Spread it.
Who are you again?
I am Matthew Claremont, the
And-
lovely Matthew Claremont.
That makes me Diana Bishop.
Doctor.
Dr. Diana Bishop. Exactly. Full title.
Full title. He's Matthew Good, actually.
Yes.
I'm Teresa Palmer.
And we're getting on really well.
We are.
And today we are in Cardiff, which is doubling a little bit for Oxford, and we're having a hell of a time, and it's really exciting.
And we're not there.
No, but Deborah is
Yes.
the genius who wrote this, and she really is an amazing woman. And
We want to say hi,
yeah.
give you guys a shout out, say thanks for all the support and the
I'm
love.
sorry that we can't be there because we love a free drink, and they would be free drinks for us. If you're, I don't know if you're just not charging too much.
That's right. Guys, we love you. Say hi to Deborah from us. And mwah. G'day, All Souls,
Sorry.
friends. Oh, and hello there. It's a
Yes.
member of our crew.
We have so many.
We have lots of people here because we are making a TV show.
All Souls trilogy.
That's right.
If it's good, the first season, we don't know. We'd love to get to the third season, fourth
Yes.
season, good season.
Spread the word,
Fingers
guys.
crossed.
Spread it.
Who are you again?
I am Matthew Claremont, the
And-
lovely Matthew Claremont.
All right, so why don't we do into a couple of announcements for people that are here and online. If you want to post photos, you want to ask questions, make sure that you either tag us on Twitter or you use the hashtag AllSoulsConNOLA. And also, as a reminder, if you have not seen in your bag, there is a trivia contest that's provided by our friends at the All Souls discussion group on Facebook, sponsored by them. And if you are actually online, you have a chance to submit the trivia via our website. We emailed the URL to you, but if you don't remember it, it's allsoulscon.org/2017-online.
And so to raise additional funds for the Bodleian, we also have a number of auctions available on eBay. You'll find the links pinned to the post on Twitter and Facebook. And then here, we also have silent auctions, additional items, which you can take a look in the back and just bid on each item. And anything that doesn't have an auction sheet on it, it's available on eBay.
All right, and also as a reminder that thanks to the wonderful NOPSI Hotel and our friends at Market Whole Foods, we have coffee and tea beverages throughout the day, and take advantage. You actually taste 3 different teas, so I hope you like it. And with that said,
We have the first of many giveaways. So everyone ready? Okay.
for those of you that have a mug or a cup in front, we're going to do a cheer. Just look under your mug or cup.
No? No? No one?
It's behind that sign. All right. You won. Congratulations, you actually won a set from Market Whole Foods with their wonderful tea. All right, and now to get started with the program, we have the three most lively demons in the audience and the only people with a cooler t-shirt than mine.
Please welcome Jean, Valerie, and Angela. Sorry. Wait, do over. Jean, Valerie, and Angela.
I thought somehow she got me out of public speaking.
Okay, we're going to do this clean today.
Yes. We forgot to swear job at home, but yeah. Welcome everyone to All Souls. It's nice to see so many new faces and so many old faces. We're thrilled to be invited back. It was such a wonderful experience last time, and I want to thank Laura and Karen for having the energy and the drive to make this a reality. If you haven't looked at the syllabus today, our speech is going to be called Empathy for the Devils, and we'd like to open up with a few words from Deb. Now, this is the scene where Diana and her father visit Goody Alsop, and she introduces him to her teachers. The familiars want to come out and play, but Diana is reluctant to set Cora free in London because she believes it's going to be disastrous. Her father finally convinces her to own her magic and give it a try. And Cora comes out and plays with Bennu and plays with Goody's fetch. And fireballs and water bubbles fly through the air. "What are you?" I asked, wondering how she managed to absorb all the conflicting powers of water and fire. "You, but not you." The fire drake blinked, her glassy eyes studying me. A swirling ball of energy balanced at the end of her spade-shaped tail. The fire drake gave her tail a flick, tipping the ball of energy into my cupped hands. It looked just like the one I had given Matthew back in medicine. "What is your name?" I whispered. "You may call me Cora," she said in a language of smoke and mist. Cora bobbed her head in farewell, melted into a gray shadow, and disappeared. Her weight thudded into my center. Her wings curved around my back, and there was stillness. I took a deep breath. "That was great, honey," my father squeezed me tight. "You were thinking like fire." Empathy is a secret to most things in life, including magic. Look how bright the threads are now. All around us, the world gleamed with possibility. And in the corners, the steadily brightening indigo and amber weave warned that time was growing impatient. And it was in that moment Deborah tried to communicate to us that empathy is the key. And we're going to use empathy today to look at several of the characters who may not be as popular with some portions of the fandom or people have had very visceral reactions to, and see if we can't use empathy to find some compassion for them.
All right, so we're going to cover the differences between sympathy and empathy. And most of you know this. We're not pretending you guys are stupid. We know you know this. But we're going to cover it. So, both sympathy and empathy have roots in the Greek term pathos, meaning suffering and feeling. Both are forms of communicating concern and well-being. But sympathy is not empathy. Sympathy is more of an act of commiseration and acknowledgement of another's grief. Sympathy is saying what's expected. So that's why we have sympathy cards when someone dies, because you don't necessarily know how it feels when someone dies. So you send a sympathy card, and I'm sorry for your loss. That's sympathy.
It's not to say that you can't have empathy, but empathy is putting yourself in that person's shoes. What do they feel like? You're internalizing their emotions. So it's taking it a step further. And I want to separate it from tolerance. Everyone says, oh, well, tolerance, the creatures tolerate each other in their world, but they don't have empathy for each other. Tolerating someone or something or an idea is enduring, and sometimes it's with antipathy. It's not always, I'll tolerate you, but I know that you're going to go away eventually, or that it's going to pass. And Diana even says that to Matthew in there. You're tolerating my magic, thinking I'm going to beat it into submission someday. So tolerating is just passing time.
Oh, there you go.
We're going to try somebody easy first. We're going to start out with Baldwin Montclair. And
We're going to ask you to speak loudly. Yeah, get close.
now the first thing we want is, first thing you think of when you think of Baldwin, lady in the purple, speak out. Yes. Yeah, you.
Okay, control.
Okay. He's controlling.
He's controlling. Okay, that's number two. Jerk.
Who said jerk? Patricia.
Okay, Patricia. Okay. That lady in the back. Without the charm.
Repeat it. Philippe without the charm. Yeah. Okay, need to identify her by face recognition.
Janelle.
I got her.
It's Janelle back there.
Got her.
Okay. Lady back in the green, last one. Angry.
Sexist. Oh.
Okay. Okay.
So he's not someone you would typically immediately have empathy for. Not even sympathy. You don't want to tolerate him. Yes. Yeah. Hardship. Fears. Yeah. Fears.
Fierce.
Okay.
I want the jerk. Okay. Who said jerk? Patricia. Stand up here.
Stand up, dear. Come to the podium.
Come to the podium. Come to that microphone.
Well, this is all a surprise.
Okay. So you said jerk. Now, I want you to turn around and say something nice about Baldwin.
Baldwin, I admire your loyalty to your family.
There we go.
Okay.
And why did you come to loyalty? I'm sorry, you're not done.
Oh, no. You have not been excused from class yet.
Why did I say loyalty?
Yes.
I guess what came to mind was when he was determined to help find Diana. He had a mission, he had a plan.
And what do you think his motivations were? It's because he's a jerk? Maybe?
Well, to
I'm
show
sorry,
that probably a bit of a power play, like he's the one in charge and he can do it, right? And Matthew, you're so distracted, you're in love, you won't be able to handle this, let me do it, sort of thing. It's a good and a bad thing.
Oh, okay, all right. She dismissed.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Patricia.
We're trying to get the bridge from the negative to the positive. What's the bridge? How do you get there? How do you say something negative about him and something positive about him? It's with empathy.
Yeah.
What would things that would make you feel empathetic for Baldwin? His strategic thinker, exactly. I think in the Book of Life, the opening, his re-entrance into the All Souls world, put yourself in his shoes. You're grieving for Philippe for the past how many years? 50, 60 years? And you hear your father's blood song. Oh, sure.
Okay.
So one way to get to empathy is putting yourself in his shoes. How would you feel entering back in your troublesome brother has been gone for a number of months, and you're coming back.
You're going to have to fix that speaker.
We can't. Sound people are gonna have to fix that speaker. That's terrible. Or move closer here. Okay. There we go. Bring it this way, should be okay. This way? Yeah. Because you won't get the feedback off the speaker. All right, so where were we?
Trying to build the bridge from a negative to a positive and having empathy for Baldwin. One of the ways is to put yourself in his shoes. And when he's entering the All Souls world again, his brother's been gone for a number of months, he hears the blood song of Philippe, and I think that, or the blood vow of Philippe, and I think that drives a lot. And I put myself in his shoes. How would I feel if a message was coming from a deceased loved one? Would I bust into a room not caring? Probably. And it helps me understand his motivations a little more, too.
Does that make sense, or we're just off our rocker? Yeah? Okay. All right. No, I think the main thing is we see Baldwin in A Discovery of Witches for 2 short chapters. He's in, out, he fights with Matthew, he needles Matthew, Matthew rolls his eyes, Isabel rolls her eyes, they're done with Baldwin. But Baldwin is not really kept in the loop about his family, is he? No one tells him what's going on. He has to find out by happenstance. So by the time the Book of Life comes around, here comes this witch that he dealt with before and caused the family a lot of problems, and now she's carrying the blood song of his dead father. I'd be a little mad if I didn't know. So maybe I wouldn't act as Roman as he acted, but I'd be mad. So, go ahead, Jean.
Okay. I was going to say, also to keep in mind with Baldwin, he's the head of the family, and that is a very Roman thing.
Yes.
He's a paterfamilias, and he has a house in chaos right now. His brother's disappeared for how many months? There's creatures living with his mother that would never have happened when his father was alive, in a manner of sanctuary. No one has told him anything, and yet he is the one that is managing the congregation and basically managing PR for the family in an effort to keep things under control in an uncontrollable situation. As a strategic thinker, to be forced to come up with strategy with information being withheld is also extremely frustrating. The information's out there, but no one wants to give it to him, which is another thing to add on top of the grief and on top of the frustration and on top of basically being mad. I mean,
Yeah.
And we're not asking you to like him at the end of the day. You have your opinion, but just it's possible to empathize for him.
Now the next question is does empathy lead to compassion with Baldwin? I mean, another thing you've got to keep in mind, he's been a soldier for 2 millennia. I mean, what does that do to a person? Yes, he's very tough on the outside. He's very unemotional. He's very stoic. But does that mean he's unfeeling? I think we have several instances, especially not only in chapter 31 of The Discovery of Witches, but later on in the Book of Life, where he does show some feeling, especially towards his sister, when he finally accepts Diana and accepts the blood vow of his father. And they are in a position, not only when they go to rescue Matthew, but afterwards when he's telling her, you need to take care of yourself. He's gruff, but he does care.
Did that change anybody's mind? Yes?
Yes?
Really?
Yay us! Yay us! See, that's empathy at work. Looking at a situation from a little bit different, from the perspective of the person who you don't find to be particularly appealing or empathetic, or behaving in a manner that you don't necessarily approve of or appreciate. Now, yeah, is he sexist? Sure. I mean, all day long.
He's that.
We're hoping in future books maybe he gets a little more modern, because he is kind of a fuddy-duddy that way.
You're hoping.
But, you know,
You're hoping.
I'm hoping.
I know.
But
I am sandwiched between two Baldwin fanatics. This is Team Baldwin right here.
and this is why we said we're going to start out with something easy, something we know, Jim
Yes,
Baldwin.
yes.
But yeah, so I mean, but that's how empathy works. Do you always get to compassion? No, but empathy will, in fact, give you greater understanding. And some characters, I mean, at the end of the day, you may go through this whole process and still not have a lick of compassion for them. We won't go through the whole process, but I would put forth that if you look at the continuum, everyone here loves Philippe. Philippe is great. Philippe probably has his problems we haven't learned yet, but Philippe and Baldwin and Benjamin are all on a continuum. As Deb described him as he walked in the door, he was the favorite and the most like Philippe. They had the same loves, wine, women, and war. Now, if you look at Benjamin and you went through the whole analysis and tried to apply empathy, I don't think you could get to compassion with him because at the end of the day, what we know of that's going on with Benjamin, he's just a bad dude.
He's beyond.
So the process of empathy isn't an end goal here. It's a process. And we're going to keep going with a Kit.
Let's try a different one.
Yeah, let's try. We're trying Kit now.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Anybody have words to say about Kit?
Kit.
Selfish.
Selfish. Okay. Obnoxious.
Childish. Challenging.
Somebody said talented.
Talented. In the back? Heartbroken.
Heartbroken. Good one.
Conniving.
Oh, that's
What was that? Spoiled.
okay. Who said conniving? Step to the front of the class, please.
She's thinking.
Uh-oh. What's going on there? Oh, relax. It's okay.
It'll be fun.
Be relaxed.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Janet.
Janet, nice to meet you. Why conniving?
Because he was always trying to get rid of Diana. He wanted to be with Matthew, even though he knew he wasn't going to be able to. So he was always playing the long game, like getting with Louisa, in order to try to get rid of Diana.
Okay. Say one nice thing about Kit.
He was brilliant.
Can I take her answer?
Sure.
Sure you can.
Because I don't really have anything coming to mind.
He was
Fair
brilliant,
enough.
but he's also a torture demon, and maybe that's a double-edged sword, too, being brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he was teetering from rock star to serial killer.
Well
in
done.
that
Thank
case.
you very much.
Thank you very much, Janet. Yay! Okay, conniving. That's a great place to start with, Kit. But yeah,
I don't disagree.
no, not at all. Let's open up that box and take that apart and see why he might be conniving.
I think Deb sets it up at the end of A Discovery of Witches with another demon, best friend of Matthew's. And what does he tell Diana? Matthew's not going to be the same person when he goes back to 1590.
So who was that?
So who walked through the door? The flip side, he wasn't that same person to Kit either. How would you feel if your best friend just showed up with a creature that you knew he always despised in the past and even hunted and sentenced to death? And you see this different Matthew now. I think that's a driving thing, to put yourself in his shoes. How would you feel?
Right.
Your best friend comes back totally changed in a way, in your perception of him. Now, put on top of that the fact that this has gone beyond crush to
Full-blown love.
full-blown love, unrequited love,
Yes.
and it's gone to obsessive love. It's not the love of a friend that you see with Hamish. This has gone over to obsessive. Now, how many of y'all remember having a high school crush where you've driven past their house on their bike and done a lot of stupid, embarrassing things? Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just pretend all of us, because
Yeah.
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 Well, now they have Facebook now. They can Facebook stalk people.
Okay.
And back in our day, it was, what's he doing? Is
Well-
he mowing the lawn? What's going on?
Drive past the ballpark. Yeah. so.
Apparently, Facebook stalking is now a thing. But yes,
I have no children. I don't know these things.
right.
Whatever.
That's what you have me for.
Good.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've got this obsessive crush going on, and you're never rational with that. I mean, Kit is a brilliant person, but let's put it, I mean, at the very least, he is not very rational through this whole story. So there's clouded thinking going on there.
I think he's also a product of his times. He lives in a ruthless court life. He's a spy. He's also a brilliant writer under a patron. I think what comes to mind is Philippe's advice throughout the trilogy: think and stay alive. And I did like Kit for most of the story up until he tried to kill Diana. He was a good guy. I didn't think he was a good guy, but I thought I could see where he was coming from, and I did have empathy from him, where the other two, they didn't have the empathy for him right away.
I mean, even more particularly, he seemed to take Baldwin's advice from A Discovery of Witches. Decide what you need to do to survive and do it. And Kit was in a very precarious position. He was the son of a shoemaker. He was not of the nobility. He was dependent upon Matthew especially for protection and status and, frankly, money. I mean, in a way, he was a kept woman.
Matthew was his sugar daddy. Oh my God.
You were going to be good today.
I know.
But in a very real way, he was dependent mostly on Matthew because, I mean, Walter tolerated because of Matthew. George Chapman had his own set of problems. Then you had Tommy. I mean, you had a number of folks in the School of Night who were either patrons or dependents. And if you look at it from Kit's perspective, it's like, wait a minute, my main patron has come back and he's got a wife who clearly doesn't like me. What is that going to do with my position? How is that going to expose me? How is that going to expose my life? My life is blowing up now. Now, which also plays into the whole fact that he's selfish and can't see beyond the fact that it's just his life that's blowing up. He doesn't care about what's going on outside that bubble.
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, we're not trying to justify his trying to kill Diana or to hurt her, but just we're trying to get to the place of empathy. It was like, can you see what motivated him? Can you put yourself in his shoes and see why he did what he did for a lot of the book?
Well, and here's another thing to think about, the outside influences. We don't know how exactly he became involved with Louisa in that particular instance, but it seemed like Louisa also had this agenda she was concerned with the prophecy. And I mean, we've got Kit's on drugs, Kit's irrational, and then let's throw Louisa into the mix, who is pretty much another bad seed like Benjamin.
Right.
I don't know that she was so bad, just unhinged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
Crazy.
Yeah, so add that to this already volatile mix, and then you've got, it's a powder keg, and I think that's where we get to the whole, hey, it's a good idea, let's try and kill the witch.
Right.
So,
And I have to say, it's a credit to Deb's writing that you have such a visceral reaction to him, that you, historical figure, that you now have an opinion. Everyone sees the one and only picture of Kit Marlowe and, oh God, I can't stand that guy. Or, because it's a product of brilliant writing. So.
yeah, and it's really, in a way, it's so brilliant because you forget that that's the same person who wrote "Come with Me and Be My Love,"
Right.
which is a very classic poem of his, which is just beautiful and heart-wrenching. But they just see him as Faust, the guy making the deal with the devil.
Yep.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I was through probably the first 4 or 5 reads. I hated Kit. I had all sorts of names for him, but, swear jar, so I won't say them today.
Yeah.
But
Promised.
when we went through this whole exercise and started using empathy as a tool and allowed it to work as magic, I don't approve of what he was doing, but I understand where he was coming from. And actually, instead of coming to compassion with him, I felt a lot of pity for him because, and I think Matthew did in a way too, because when they came back to 1590, he realized, he already knew what bad end Kit was going to meet a few years after they went back, and was it 1593? So,
Remind everybody what bad end that is.
oh, Hancock?
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say the bad end of meeting him at the end of a dagger in a Deptford pub.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is I think Matthew was also kind of a catalyst for an acceleration of that bad behavior too, because he really should have shut it down at the end of the day. So you've got so many factors going in here with Deb and the way she put it all together so beautifully, that she brings these emotions to the forefront with historical figures. I mean, they're vibrant and alive, and the fact that we're sitting here talking about, well,
Kit.
how horrible is he? It's
Well,
just,
not anymore.
There's someone with a comment in the back.
Go ahead.
Okay, Kit. I would have loved him as a character if he had just shifted one thing and not lived by the 3-year-old mentality of it's mine if I say it's mine, if it's yours it's mine, and if I can take it from you, it's mine. Because that's to be his entire theory on how to control people and wanted.
Oh, the online people can't hear it.
Okay, so basically you're saying what, selfish basically, right?
He can be selfish, but do it in a different way than 3-year-old mentality. It's their part, because in the 3-year-old mentality, it's kind of like, it's already stated, it's already, you can be selfish about, while acknowledging that it is someone else's, but say, I want instead. He was already clear that it was his already.
Yeah. I touched it, therefore it's mine. Basically, right? I agree with you. I totally do, but I do feel empathy for the position he was in. Oh.
I think people, if you have questions, people that have questions, you need to come to the microphones, otherwise people online cannot hear you. No matter how loud you shout, they can't hear you. So,
People who have questions should go to the microphones because the online streamers can't hear you.
Yeah.
yeah, we'll try and give an opportunity.
So anything else on Kit? Anybody? We good?
Oh, Linda and another.
Linda.
Come on up.
Come on up.
I wonder how much his realizing that his attraction to Matthew was not something that people approved of, especially back then, played into some of his anger. And also wonder if there was this little thought in his brain that he might, especially if Diana weren't there, be able to get Matthew drunk enough one night where, you know, things might happen that he might enjoy quite.
Keep hope alive.
Yes.
Yes.
And that as long as Diana was there, that was not ever going to happen.
And we don't know exactly how intimate their relationship was with the original timeline Matthew, who was displaced by the time walk. I mean, we just have Hamish coming back saying, well, you know, he's going to go back to 1590 and he's going to be different. Not even Hamish has an idea of just how different that is. He's just assuming he's going to be more protective and sexist, and she's going to be more a second-class citizen because of what he knows about the culture of the 16th century. He doesn't know the particulars of how any of those relationships worked, which is another layer.
Yeah. And then reacting to your comment about Matthew should have shut Kit down right away, I think maybe since Matthew knew what was going to happen to Kit in a few years, he wanted to keep him around as long as possible, but then,
Yeah.
obviously when
Yeah.
he tried to kill Diana, that was,
Yeah, all bets are off.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was trying to be a good friend, probably trying to be too good of a friend.
Yeah.
He was being, I think part of it was, Matthew was being very sentimental, because when he got back to 1590 with his old friends, he changed. I mean, he was surrounded by a circle of friends, and in some ways, he sort of blossomed with the School of Night, because he was back with his old friends, and he was just happy to be there.
He was just happy to be there. Yep. With his pals.
Which is why a lot of things slid, I think.
Yeah.
And Matthew always did have a soft spot for demons, so I think that he himself was being empathetic a little bit towards Kit in his situation.
Until the whole Diana deal.
Yeah, until the whole Diana thing. That's always an asterisk, until Diana.
Yeah.
All right, our last,
The last one might be hard.
no, we have more.
Oh, good.
One more question, and then we're going to move on.
So mine's just quick. I'm Sheila. Hi.
Hi, Sheila.
And so I think that he repeats that relationship with Hamish. And I don't know if Hamish is on your list of devils or, who we should.
No.
But it's interesting because he is very similar to Kit.
Yes.
They're two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
And so and I think there is that love between them, and I think we all have experienced that, where you love someone but don't necessarily in the
Cross the
same
line.
way.
Yes.
Yes, in the same way that they love you. But I think it's interesting that he does repeat that relationship
Yes.
with Hamish.
Yep.
And Hamish we don't despise as much, but he has that same opposition for Diana from the first meeting, in Discovery of Witches. He's always had a bit of a, he words
Yeah.
it as, do you know what you're getting into? But
Right.
yeah.
Like for Hamish, I will always speak up for Hamish because that's
Team
my
Hamish.
dude. We're a small group, but we exist.
Small but powerful.
Yes, okay. The thing with Hamish, his motivation was totally different. His motivation was, Matthew, what the hell are you getting yourself into with this witch?
Give me $1.
I don't have $1 on me. I owe you $1. Oh, we're terrible. Anyway, but yes, definitely same, different sides of the same coin, Hamish and Kit. His pals, the demons. Okay, so our last one. Anybody else on Kit? Going once, twice. Good. Yes. Next. Next one's going to be hard. Brace yourselves. Yep. Hang on.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Okay. You want to introduce her?
Go ahead.
Okay. Give me some words for Satu. Swear jar. I'm already down $1.
You got to cut to. Oh.
Scared.
Powerful. Scared and powerful so far. Cruel. Aggressive. Selfish. Sadistic. Vulnerable.
Vulnerable. Okay.
Trapped. Jealous.
Okay.
Grasping.
Ooh, these are good.
Misguided. Lost.
Okay. All right. Who said grasping? Okay.
You said the magic word.
Yeah.
Grasping.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. Again.
Right. Okay. So, what scene brings you to grasping?
The scene between her and Diana in Venice, when Diana takes her power. All she had was the power that she wanted to be. She wasn't part of the patriarchy,
Right.
but she very much wanted to be.
Right.
So she was going to be the one to do the dirty work for those who didn't put themselves forward, just to
Okay.
get herself a seat at the table.
And that's so funny, too, because when we went through this, when we went through our run-through, and we didn't need the swear jar. It was flying left and right. Your point was exactly what we hit upon, where it's like, no, she just wanted that power.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about you flip it and give her another motivation? What else?
Fear.
Fear. And why fear?
Because if she doesn't do what she thinks they want, she won't get the power that she desires. And that's her fear. What if I can't be at the table?
Right. Okay, that's good. I like it.
And I right off the bat, I was not empathetic at all with Satu. I mean, even up until yesterday, I'm like, please tell me why I should feel empathetic for, and that's a good motivation. If now I put myself in her shoes and fear is driving me, what if I can't deliver? What if people get desperate? I can see it. I can start to get a little bit more empathy for her.
Taking it back to Kit, you know, she and Kit, they're seventh grade mean girls.
Yeah.
And is that act out of fear?
Right. All right, well, let me offer another motivation for her. And I'm not her fan. I would say if you knew there was something extremely different with you, because later on we found out she was a weaver, untrained, and she's got all this power, and they were planning to capture Diana for the same reasons she has these powers. So if you knew that, you knew the congregation you're working for is really interested in these powers, why would you not come forward if you were Satu? Anybody? Come on up. Okay.
Hi, I'm Kathy. She's terrified because she probably knows some of the history where they tortured, and she might not have known actually what Benjamin was doing, but Gerbert, I mean, she knew he was up to no good, and he had relationship with witches anyways. So she's terrified. She's trying to protect herself.
Yeah, but she also was more than willing to put somebody else in that place for her.
Yeah, because she was protecting herself. It doesn't matter if her sister got tortured. It wasn't her.
Survival, right?
Survival.
Yep.
Kind of a Jillian thing, too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Satu? No? No one? Really?
She's a hard woman.
Wow. I mean.
Yeah, come on up. She's a hard one. Let's say she's a work in progress.
Yes. Well, a lot of work now.
Hi, Janelle.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Janelle, I was wondering if anybody has sympathy for the fact that in the end she loses all of her powers. She's left with nothing. And I didn't like her throughout the read, but at the end when it's all gone, she's got nothing, I definitely felt sorry for her. So here's
a place to start.
That's why I said trapped, because she's in a position where she's damned if she does and she's damned if she doesn't.
It's worse than the Oscars music.
Yeah.
She could end up broken open herself, trying for somebody to try and find her power. She's embedded enough with what's going on with the organization, which is the congregation, that she's able to see what they can and they can't do. Like, she's backed into a corner, and then that can trip people, like into doing something you might not do. Were you not trapped? A dog will bite you, even if he's nice, if he's trapped.
Yeah.
Right.
And she was trapped. She was, because, I mean, she knew what they were planning to do to Diana. What if she revealed herself then? No, she had to play the game in order to survive. So that's as far as my empathy goes with her. She was a little bit.
One of the words that came to mind with me for Satu was subjugation. I mean, she had masters that she was always answering to. Her agenda really wasn't her own. I mean, aside from making sure she survived, she had no chance to explore her powers really and truly and maybe find her way out of the predicament she put herself in.
So, I only lost $1. That's good.
Yes. Demons were fancy today.
We're fancy. Go.
And we're going to close with a couple more words from Deb. And this is our favorite passage that had to do with empathy. And this is from the oubliette and the fairy tale memory that Diana had when she was in there. This has been my favorite part. Memories of other nights flooded forth. Sometimes I asked for his name. Other times I proclaimed my lack of interest in a stupid prince. Mostly I wondered why anyone would want to be with a useless witch. The prince loved Diana, despite the fact she couldn't seem to fly. He could see the ribbons binding her, though no one else could. He wondered what they were for and what would happen if the witch took them off. But the prince didn't think it was polite to mention them, in case she felt self-conscious. I nodded my 7-year-old head, impressed with the prince's empathy, and my much older head moved against the stone wall too. I hope you all can nod your head in empathy with a couple of the characters we've talked about today. Thank you very much.
Bye, you guys.
Our next presenter is Professor Richard Campanella from Tulane University. He's from the School of Architecture. We don't have a Gallowglass cosplay this year, but we do have a real knight within Professor Campanella. So I'm not sure what he's charging for photo ops, but I would approach him for one if you want a picture with the real knight. Professor?
Okay, good morning. Thanks for the invitation, thanks for the introduction, and thanks also for your interest in the history and geography of the city. Before I begin, I want to point out I'm going to be showing a lot of maps and graphs here. There's about a dozen open seats and some standing room space. So for the folks over here, even in the middle of the presentation, if you want to just get up and walk over here, that'd be great. And as you do, you'll be going from the slightly higher elevation river end of the building to the lake end of the building, and I'll explain that in a moment. My goals are twofold here. First, to contextualize the experiences you're having this weekend and your forays around the city. And the second is to contextualize the roles and appearances of New Orleans in the trilogy. And I want to point out that you are barely on the North American continent right now. You are on the fringes, the littoral deltaic fringes of very young, recently deposited, I consider almost like an alluvial doormat of all the water and sediment pouring out of North America. And this is the one city where as a geographer, I'm kept busy here because you can't understand the history and the culture unless you understand the geography. So I'm going to start on that note. If you look at this map of North America, for those of you who live north of the Ohio River, the northern half of the continent, as recently as 18 to 20,000 years ago, which is a blink of the eye geologically, global temperatures were much cooler and ice sheets, glaciers, covered half the continent. And so what starts happening after glacial maximum is that global temperatures slowly, inconsistently, but generally start to warm. Not like the extreme warming we've seen in the past century, but as they did, those ice sheets melted and released that frozen H2O into liquid form. And as they receded, unveiled this kind of newly resculpted North American topography and hydrology, such that you now have massively augmented amounts of water containing sediment, okay? So imagine all those rivers now conflowing and becoming the lower Mississippi Valley. Those sediments fill in this indentation in the Earth's crust known as the Mississippi Embayment, and this becomes the lower Mississippi Valley west of Memphis and places like that. So now when we zoom in on our area here, you'll notice where New Orleans is, right over here. My laser is not quite reaching it there, but if you were here as recently as 8,000 years ago, you would be in the Gulf of Mexico right now. You would be in salt water. So if you look at that drainage coming down in the upper center, imagine this, almost this kind of conveyor belt of water carrying sediment that once it disembogues into the Gulf of Mexico, loses its kinetic energy and dumps out all of that sediment at the bottom of the sea, to the point that it starts to break the surface. And it converts open salt water to salt marsh. It raises a little bit higher. The salt marsh becomes freshwater swamp. It raises a little bit higher, and it now becomes honest-to-goodness land, to the point that the river can no longer go through its own deposition because the deposition is higher. And so what it does is it leans over to the side and starts creating new land over here. And then every 1,000 years or so, the river moving water, all moving water wants in its physics is a steeper, shorter gradient to its destination. So if a bank breaks open and the water can find that steeper, shorter gradient in a new direction, more and more water is going to go there. It might be 1% 99, and then 298, and then 1090, and then 4060, and once it's over 50, then the entire river lunges in that direction. So that, we call these avulsions. That first major avulsion where the Mississippi started flowing direct east is about 4,300 years ago, and that's what starts to create New Orleans over here. A couple of other jumps create the rest of the southeastern Louisiana, and so in this manner, of a completely uncontrolled, lunging, dynamic, fluvial river, this land surface arises. So contemplate this, that we are a species that evolved in a hard continental environment. And here you have the exact opposite. Humans like hard earth beneath our feet. And here we have this fluidity, this dynamism. And much of the story of New Orleans has been trying to impose rigidity on that fluidity. But what this did is, while it also gave us this beautiful city, we would not have this without those structural engineering interventions. What it also did was interrupt the very processes that created the underlying landscape. And this can be, the line from that can be traced straight to the Katrina catastrophe of 12 years ago and to our future crises. So this is the present-day channel of the Mississippi right here. And I'm going to take a transect right across there. Everything I just described accounts for the majority of the land building here. Again, just over about 7,000 or 8,000 years. Take a transect of the river. There's the channel of the river. The rest of the land building comes not every 1,000 years or so when the river jumps, but every 3 to 5 years when there's excess water, when you have a big snowpack in the interior, excess water comes down and it simply exceeds the banks of the river. We call these floods. Nature doesn't call them floods. To a river, it's perfectly natural to store excess water laterally, okay? And so it goes down a few months later, by August or so. A few years later, it might go up again. And so what this does is that once again, that water, as it comes up on the surface, loses its energy and dumps out sediment. And it dumps out most of the coarser material, which would be sand and silt particles, immediately, and then smaller amounts of smaller particles farther back. So you see where this is going? Repeat this every 3 to 5 years, and you have this deltaic peculiarity where you walk uphill to the river, okay? Now, I'm guessing where most of you are in environments where you walk down to the river. When you're hiking in the Appalachians or the Berkshires or wherever, the Grand Canyon, you walk down to the river, water carves down. In a deltaic environment, water builds up, okay? So when I say the river end of the building being higher elevation, I don't mean the room here, I mean outside, okay? It's very slightly, just a few inches, but as you will see, in such a flat environment, a couple of inches can spell the difference I'd say more a couple of feet of topographic elevation over many miles can spell the difference between a neighborhood being settled in the age of Napoleon versus the age of jazz versus the space age, okay? So the less you have of a very precious resource, topographic elevation, the more it is valued. So we call this, you are on the back slope of the natural levee here, you are slightly above sea level, and as you go back, we call that area the back swamp. It's all drained away now, but this would be a few blocks in that direction. So everything I just described converted this smooth littoral bight, B-I-G-H-T bight, to what you now recognize as southeastern Louisiana. So next time you look at a map and you see that Louisiana protrudes and progrades from the coasts of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, this is why, because of the unique nature of having this land building machine called the Mississippi River. So we start to introduce humans to this environment. I want to emphasize this was a highly humanized environment before the European arrival. The area was rich in ecological resources, and about 10 different Native American groups circulated through these areas for really the same reasons that attracted Europeans here, of all sorts of opportunities for ingress and egress, coming and going, as well as the rich finfish and shellfish and other opportunities. Europeans, I noticed a couple of folks from Canada here. The city originally was founded by French Canadians. Robert LaSalle comes down in 1682 and is the first to make that connection between the Great Lakes region and French Canada down the Mississippi and connect it with the French colony of Saint-Domingue. So 15 years later, the French crown is finally convinced that if they don't make good on Robert LaSalle's claim of Louisiana, that the Spanish would or the English would. And so they send two French Canadians down, the Lemoyne brothers, and they eventually, the younger of them, Bienville, establishes New Orleans 300 years ago this coming year. The tricentennial is 2018. And the reason why they selected the site here, right by the center, lower center of your image, is that they're already established in Biloxi and Mobile, but as you see that red line over there, it's 100 miles of open water, and then you have to penetrate the mouth of the Mississippi River. It looks clear on this map, but that when the river is low, you have sandbars, you have shoals. If your sailing ship gets caught up on one of those shoals, you're stuck. Steamboats are a century in the future, so no one's going to come tow you out. Then you're going against the current, which you can do if the wind is at your back. If the wind is not at your back, you're stuck in the water again. So the natives showed them this neat trick whereby, you see that little green line there, instead of coming out up the mouth of the Mississippi River, you could take this backdoor alternative route through the protected waters of Lake Pontchartrain, which is really a bay, come up a little, you see in the map on the upper left, the brighter grayer areas are the higher terrain. So come up a little bayou called Bayou St. John, which is still with us today, disembark a little road called Bayou Road, a slight ridge through the swamps, and for that reason, Bienville established the New Orleans where it is today. The original city is the French Quarter, a few blocks in that direction. So the French Quarter is located there because it was a portage connection. You could go out to the rest of the world, or you could go up the Mississippi. And that is the essential geographical reasoning for the city. The one spot, the nexus between this vast foreland going all the way out to the South Atlantic system, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean Europe, Northern Europe, and the emerging North America, and connect it with the hinterland, what proved to be the wealthiest valley on earth. So what an incredible situation for a city, if only you could make peace with this swampy fluvial site. So when we zoom in on this area, you'll notice there's the French Quarter laid out about 4 years after the founding of the city. And despite the fortuitous nature of the geographical situation here, the colony gets off to a very rough start. There's diseases, there's disasters. The original commercial goals of the colony, growing tobacco here, didn't work out. Gold and silver was not found. So the colony really struggles through the early French colonial era. And then both the French and the English are engaged in a larger war throughout their colonial possessions. In Europe, this is known as the 7 Years' War. Here we call it the French and Indian War. 1754, and the war is not going well for French interests, so by the early 1760s, the French, to keep their predicted losses out of the hands of the hated English, secretly cede over Louisiana, the entire basin, as well as the city of New Orleans, to a Spanish cousin. And so from 1762 to the rest of the century, this becomes a Spanish city, Nueva Orleans. Now, it's still a Francophone society. It's a French Creole, kind of West Indian, Afro-Caribbean society, but it now has Spanish administrators. So you could almost think, given that Spain was much more focused in Mexico, Mesoamerica, Latin America, they used Louisiana as sort of a buffer between their really valued colonies on one side and English colonies on the other side. So they didn't invest too much here. So you could almost think of New Orleans at that time as being a colonial orphan, not really wanted by the French, not really wanted by the Spanish. And a colleague of mine describes colonial era New Orleans as a rogue colony that became a colony of rogues. Smugglers, this was a hotspot for smuggling because they're so distant from government powers, and the tariffs were so high that everyone was into smuggling. It was really, really ubiquitous. So what changes this, to going from the era of the unvalued orphan to the most valuable place in the imperial universe, is that most dramatic era in Western, at least Western Hemisphere history, the Age of Revolution. So this begins with a series of little-known but very important slave insurrections in the Caribbean. It continues with the American Revolution. A decade after that, the French Revolution. And then very importantly, if you look down there at the bottom right, 1791, a complex caste war in Saint-Domingue, this is the western half of the island of Hispaniola, breaks out into war. And this eventually develops into a full-scale insurrection of the enslaved people there. This is an extremely oppressed society, highly enslaved, and from the French perspective, it is the most lucrative sugar colony, producing immense amounts of sugar cane. So that's going on in the background. Meanwhile, there's a new player on the chessboard here. It's called the United States. And two agricultural technological breakthroughs in this era start to transform and spread the geography of plantation agriculture. One, you all know about the cotton gin, right? The cotton engine that effectively separates lint from seed. So this makes cotton production a lot more faster, better, cheaper, and more profitable. What you might not know about is 2 years later, right here in uptown, what is now uptown New Orleans, the technique to granulate Louisiana sugarcane juice is perfected. This had been done in the tropical region for centuries, but we are in the subtropics here. We do have freezes. The process was a little bit different. That process, once perfected, allowed this bulky, molasses and things like that to be turned into the dry sugar grains that you put in your coffee. Once again, this makes it exportable and more profitable at the same time that Saint-Domingue is in flames. So you have high demand for sugar, and now Louisiana becomes a sugar producer. Cotton happens to grow really well in the lower valley, and sugarcane grows well in the Deltaic Plain. So now New Orleans is looking a little bit more interesting. You can't get these commodities out to world markets without a transshipment port. And so Americans are now moving down the Ohio River. Jefferson notes they need a western port. They need a place to take all that wheat and corn and cotton and sugar, transship it to ocean-going ships, and that has to be New Orleans. So Spain is getting nervous here. It's got the Americans to worry about on one side and the French to worry about on the other. So they try to make some negotiations, and they eventually secretly retrocede Louisiana and New Orleans back to the French with some arm twisting on the part of Napoleon. Now, Napoleon really is not really prioritizing for Louisiana. He sees Louisiana as sort of a breadbasket to feed the enslaved multitudes in Saint-Domingue once that insurrection is crushed. Instead, the insurrection is triumphant. And the French are ejected out of Saint-Domingue, and it becomes the second independent country in the Western Hemisphere. This is present-day Haiti. So upon losing Saint-Domingue, Napoleon loses interest in Louisiana at the same time that the Americans are highly interested in just buying New Orleans. So Monroe and Livingston and other diplomats are dispatched by Jefferson to try to purchase New Orleans, and to their surprise, Napoleon says, "Would you like to have the whole colony?" So, legal or not, and it was probably technically unconstitutional at the time, and Jefferson is like, let's sign the documents and debate it later. And so for $15 million and some retirement of debt, the Louisiana Purchase is signed right here. You could visit the room to this day, right in the Cabildo. There's a ceremony at the Place d'Armes, now Jackson Square, December 20th, 1803. Okay, very significant date. And then 10 years later, steamboats are developed, which allows for contra-current navigation, the ability to go upstream, okay? So now you have a lot of gears in place to completely reverse the colonial orphan. So it's in this era that you see, let's see, there's a rogue message coming up from Apple there. Can you? It's in this era that let's see here. That the Americans start to pour down from the northeast, and I still need that. That's still, yeah, it's not. Maybe you have to come out and then go back in. Okay, great. That the interpretation radically shifts, and almost every observer here starts to view New Orleans as the city of the future. Here's some of these quotes. This is Jefferson himself. "No such position for the accumulation of perpetuity of wealth or power ever existing." He's speaking of New Orleans here. "New Orleans would doubtless one day become the greatest city on the continent, perhaps even in the world, the greatest commercial city in the universe," because everyone is predicting that that hinterland is going to fill in, and this is the one place to get it to port. And so the complex Francophone, French Creole, Afro-Caribbean, Hispanic, Mediterranean, Latino society here is now being visited upon by new emigres coming in from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. They're Anglophones, they're more likely to be Protestant, and they have a very different way of doing just about everything down here. From English common law as opposed to Roman civil law and Napoleonic Code, and to this day we have some elements in Louisiana law of both of them here. They buried the dead differently. Most of the locals were Catholics. They brought down different architecture. And so you'll read some of these quotes here. "The Americans are swarming in from the northern states, invading Louisiana as the holy tribes invaded the land of Canaan. This will soon be an American town, both good and bad." And so thus begins this, thank you very much, this great cultural adventure of this, at times, painful process of cultural assimilation and hybridization that to this day is not entirely complete, of this complex, old world-oriented, rather provincial outlying colony being absorbed by this unabashedly capitalistic, expanding New World nation. And so as Americans move west, I'm going to do a time sequence of maps there. I don't know if you can see it, but the yellow dots are white Americans, the red dots are African Americans, mostly enslaved. This is in 1790, this is actual data, 1790, our first census. So here's 1800, you could see the movement coming down the Ohio River, 1820, 1830. So each one of those are producing, they're shipping down to New Orleans, so you could just imagine the commercial development in this area. So let me explain the social structure of the city at this time, because it's distinct from what's going on in most other southern cities and most of American cities. This is some nasty stuff, so bear with me, okay? It was both a tripartite, a three-level caste system with classes within each of those castes. So this being a highly enslaved society, there was a free white caste in which caste from poor indentured servants to working to middle class, upper middle class professionals who would have been in this area right here, cotton factors, lawyers, insurance brokers, merchants, negotiating the planter aristocracy, the sugar and cotton planters upriver, with their customers in Europe and the rest of the world. One of the distinguishing aspects of local society here that you don't see in Charleston and other places was a legally recognized, substantial, well-educated population known as the gens de couleur libre, the free people of color. And so just as in any of the other castes, there was classes within here. So many of them were recently manumitted, in other words, recently freed enslaved people, working class, many artisans, and to this day there are some old descendants of the African-American Creole population, descendants of the free people of color, who are still involved in the building arts, bricklayers, electricians, and so much of the architectural heritage you've been appreciating the past days can be traceable back to this population. And there was also a very sophisticated upper middle and upper class here. Incredibly, this was a population that was legally permitted to own enslaved people themselves. So here you have a population of color owning a population of color. They also had the right to accumulate wealth and to pass wealth on to the next generation, which is extremely important as in the formation of legacy wealth. And you have the enslaved caste. And I'm putting class in quotes there because, of course, there was no mobility here. But there was a hierarchy. And, of course, the worst place to be was at the bottom of that entire antebellum period of being an enslaved field hand, which produced most of the wealth that ended up trickling up. This being a situation of urban slavery, you had domestic enslaved here as well as hired out, as they were called. And so as you walk around the front quarter, if you look behind many of those antebellum townhouses, you'll notice these slanted roof dependencies appended to the main mansion. Those, to this day, are called slave quarters. So there was a almost ironic spatial proximity between the enslaved caste and both the free people of color caste and the white caste. Each of these castes were intersected by national differences, former Haitians, people from France, people born in the United States, as well as linguistic and other cultural differences. So within the white class, there were Germans, there were Irish, etc. So this is what we mean by an extremely diverse and complex polyglot, a multilingual society. So let's start looking at some of the geography here. You are, I don't know if you can see that black dot I just put in the upper center. That's where you're sitting right now. You have the Mississippi River over here. We call that on bottom right on the west bank, or historically used to be called the right bank. You are on the east bank, used to be called the left bank. Lake Pontchartrain is in the distance. So we say lakeside versus riverside. The cardinal directions don't work well here, okay? Don't even bother with them. It's riverside, lakeside, uptown, downtown. So the areas, there's downtown, downriver, and so we call this downtown now, but if you were here 150, 200 years ago, this would have been called the uptown side of the city. So you had the higher elevation, for reasons you should now understand, what was called kind of the front of town, and then low, very interesting areas as you go in that direction, that to this day you'll hear in the vernacular here are called the back of town. This sort of very interesting, more edgy, place that was literally and figuratively on the margins, and certain groups got relegated, and we use the term marginalized, out to the back of town toward the back swamp. So there's the back swamp there. And I want to share with you this interesting anonymously written document from 1850. I think of this guy as sort of a antebellum internet troll. And he wrote this vitriolic anti-New Orleans diatribe. And I want to point out he has one section specifically reserved characterizing the back swamp. Now that's the illustration that he incorporated in it. I think Professor Harkness, Deborah Harkness, being a historian of science, would be very much familiar with the fear of wetlands and back swamps that we used to have here. If you look at some of the explanations here on the swamp here. This boiling fountain of death, he's speaking of the back swamp, this boiling fountain of death is one of the most dismal, low, and horrid. Notice the yoking of low elevation with not just dismal and low, but he actually uses the term, the term evil, the ascribing of evil. Where this is coming from is actually some of the leading medical theories of the day. It was called miasmatic theory, miasmas. The perception was that these vaporous belches of poisonous gases rose from wetlands and marshes, and that this is what caused yellow fever, dengue, malaria. In fact, that's where the word malaria comes from, malaria, bad air. And so back swamps were not just seen as inconveniences of restraining the growth of the city, but they were seen as vectors of death. And only later did we learn that the real vector was this introduced mosquito, Aedes aegypti mosquito, that was more likely to breed in cisterns and potable water and water tanks right next to people's houses than in the back swamps. Here are some of the death figures from yellow fever. 1853, 1 out of every 10 New Orleanians did not make it through the summer. Now, in the trilogy, there's a reference to the 1819 yellow fever breakout. This is actual data here, and if you look down there in 1819, there was indeed one of the first major epidemics in that year. So people lived in this sort of fear, and not understanding it, they ascribed it to environmental factors. Let me lay down some of the social geography here. Let me just orient you here. Uptown is in this direction. We have Canal Street about 5 blocks down. And then on the other side is the French Quarter, the Faubourgs, and the more French Creole. If you were there 150 years ago, you'd hear much more likely to hear the French language. It would be a more Catholic environment. It would be a more Caribbean environment. There would be more free people of color in that area. And so we have the French Quarter. Faubourg Marigny is a term that appears in your books. Okay, so that was just downriver. To this day, it's called Faubourg Marigny, just downriver from the French Quarter. And behind that, the Faubourg Treme, also still very much. So more on this side of Canal Street is where many of those Anglo-Americans, so if you were here 150 years ago, you would still hear French, but you'd hear more English. You would still see a Catholic church, but you'd see 3 Protestant churches. You would see some Caribbean architecture, but you see a lot more Greek revival, okay? So it's that sort of inscription into the built environment that you would have seen. So Anglophone, Protestant, you have immigrant settlement here, German and Irish are more likely to be here. This area was called St. Mary. Now many of you, I know the Garden District comes up in the trilogy as well. Did anyone tour the Garden District I see some hands here. That was originally a separate city. It was called Lafayette. And the Garden District starts as a nickname for the more opulent setback houses and mansions that were almost exclusively Anglo-Americans, becoming rich here really quickly with the commerce and building what was really sort of a streetcar suburb. So Lafayette is annexed into the city in 1852, and we call it the Garden District to this day. Couple of other references here in your books. The Boston Club, you all recognize that? Okay, that is still standing on Canal Street to this day. If you look at the architecture there, it's Greek Revival architecture. Who brought Greek Revival here? It wasn't really the French Creoles and the Africans and Latinos. It was coming from England. It was coming from Germany. It made its way through the Northeast, and it came down here with the Anglo-Americans. No surprise that you're seeing that on the upper town part of the city. There's a reference to the Garden District and the Ionic columns there. Same thing. Where does Ionic come from? It's come from neoclassical architecture. Then there's a reference to the Domino Club, which is the La Laurie mansion. Some of you may have toured that in the French Quarter, still standing. This is the one associated with the very sordid incident in 1834 of abused and tortured enslaved people. And so look at the distinction between that more Franco-Spanish architecture compared to the Anglo-American one. And then there's references to the Marigny, and you'll notice the difference if you look at the bottom right and compare it to the bottom left of, to this day, these are modern photographs of the lingering architectural heritage of that more Caribbean Faubourg style aesthetic compared to the American one. Civil War breaks out in 1861. 1862, the city surrenders, succumbs really, and then is occupied. Emancipation starts to radically shift social dynamics here. Formerly enslaved African Americans start to move to the hope of the city. And 15 years later, or 12 years later, is the end of Reconstruction and the installation of the white supremacist government that would prevail in southern states for almost the next 100 years or so. Only 4 months ago, the Confederate monuments were removed. Lee Circle is not too far from here. So it's the turn of the 20th century, as I shift more to more purely geographical phenomena, that we have a number of infrastructure changes that birthed the modern city that you're experiencing today. And for our purposes, I'm going to focus exclusively on not just the water system and the sewage system that was installed, but making New Orleans like other, modern 20th century cities, but finally the apparatus of municipal drainage that finally drained the hated back swamp. And so the way this worked, if you look at this 1878 map, you see where the development is. It's mostly still clinging to that higher ground closer to the Mississippi. Those empty areas are still, cut over swamp, still inundated with water and undevelopable. So the system that was installed in the 1890s used that natural topography to guide runoff, rainwater, to low spots, and then built enormous pumps and excavated outfall canals and used those pumps to mobilize the water and eject it into Lake Pontchartrain. And the effects of this were radical. It removed the runoff, it lowered the groundwater. So when you look, the beige, the kind of the yellowish areas are the higher ground, the beige are the lower ground. This is where New Orleanians lived in the 1750s. This is where they lived in the 1850s, you see, clinging to that natural levee. The next map I'm going to show you is 1910. Just as the groundwater is lowering, the back swamp is draining. You see that? People are starting to move off higher ground, convinced that and almost blissfully moving into these areas. You read that quote there, this is from one of our local writers here, George Washington Cable. 1909, he's saying this, about 10 years after the system is installed, there is a salubrity that could not be when the mosquitoes swarmed everywhere. The curtains of swamp forests are totally gone. Their sites are drained dry and covered with miles of gardened homes. This is 1930s, people spreading into neighborhoods now known as Lakeview and Gentilly. This is 1960, this is 2000. And by the way, those black dots, each one representing 25 people, spread all the way into surrounding suburban areas as well. So, what's the problem here? Cities prosper, they grow, they spread. Well, the problem is this is no ordinary city from a geographical standpoint. That delta, that depositing sediment, water was intrinsic to that formation. Block of soil here under natural conditions, that block would have 5 and only 5 components to it. No pebbles, no rocks, nothing like that. They were too heavy to make it down here. Have sand particles, silt particles, clay particles, water, and matter. About New Orleans topography that the rest of the nation has heard. What most folks don't know, including a lot of New Orleanians, this is not a natural condition. Humans sunk New Orleans below sea level, okay? And many local folks do not realize that everywhere in red, starting a couple of blocks where you're sitting, has accidentally, inadvertently subsided below sea level. In some areas to -8, -12 feet below sea level, in areas that used to be 1 to 2 feet above sea level. So this is our present-day topography here. You are situated in the mid-right, okay? The areas in green, this is the good news, are still above sea level. We're still about 50% above sea level. The yellow is within a foot of sea level. Everything in red has sunk below sea level. Worse yet, with this false sense of security that we've gotten from from these engineering interventions of pumping systems and levees and river control. We became so confident that we abandoned this beautiful architectural tradition of building above the grade. Take a look at those historic houses there. They're all built on piers above the grade, such that water in the streets is not in your home. So feeling that we didn't have to worry about this anymore, why even bother with that? This was replaced by pouring concrete slabs right at grade level. And where were these built? As the city expanded into these drained back swamps, in the very areas that were low to begin with and sinking the fastest below sea level. The worst architectural solution placed in the worst geographical areas. Everything I'm describing now is intramunicipal. This is drainage and manipulations going on within the metropolis. Let's zoom out a bit, New Orleans left center there. And we're also scouring and scoring the deltaic plain for navigation purposes, to make a call at the Port of New Orleans more efficient. The Industrial Canal is excavated about 90 years ago. The Intracoastal Waterway comes through in the 1930s and 1940s. These are important national assets, but they come at the expense because every time you tear apart the wetlands, salt water intrudes, there's more erosion, and by the way, we've locked the Mississippi in artificial levees, which prevents that fresh water and sediment from getting deposited. Worse yet, the MRGO, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet Canal, was built a little over 50 years ago. It's an economic disappointment. It's an ecological catastrophe. Again, saltwater intrusion, erosion, and so we're converting this river-dominated delta increasingly to a delta that is dominated by wave action, sinking and eroding. So as a result of this, plus 10,000 miles of oil and gas extraction canals, each of which have their effect of saltwater intrusion, everything in red on this map, 2,000 square miles, has disappeared. Imagine subtracting the state of Delaware from the southern portion of Louisiana, 2,000 square miles in one human lifetime. Okay? Everything in red is gone. Everything in green, at least halfway down on the slide there, is sinking vertically and or eroding horizontally in the face of what's happening to sea level. Rising, okay? 4 inches in the 20th century, about 10 times that amount in the 21st century. So when we look in this direction here, this is the pre-Katrina situation. The fear was that a hurricane would push storm surge, okay, that raised, you all know about storm surge, we got a good lesson in it 3 times this past month, that would push storm surge into these water bodies. And so when you have a potential enemy coming from any angle, the natural human response is to build a fort around it. That red line I just overlaid is the pre-Katrina levee system, but it had all sorts of holes and openings and weak spots in it, such that when that feared storm finally arrived 12 years and a month ago, named Katrina, it came on a straight north. I have a rotated perspective here. That red line is straight north, left to right. And just as feared, it's rotating in a counterclockwise direction, sucking up a storm surge. Where that comes from, low barometric pressure, rising air, sucks up a dome of water. Then the formerly Category 5 winds is just pushing that toward the land surface. So just as predicted, it came in and got funneled into those 2 artificial navigation canals. They had guide levees. When you try to force water into a narrow spot, think putting your thumb in front of a garden hose, right? You don't increase the density of the water, you increase its power and its speed. So that water starts coming in here, it starts coming in like Pontchartrain, it makes its way up those outfall canals. Remember when the drainage system was installed? We're going to rotate in over here. The surge is coming in on those arrows to the right. Overtopping of the levee starts at 7 a.m. There's an initial breach, and I want to distinguish between overtopping. So here's your levee, your earthen embankment, then there's a flood wall. Overtopping means that outside water simply rises above the top of your levee or flood wall and starts cascading on the other side. That's bad enough, but your system could absorb some of that. It's when that entire wall disintegrates that you have a full-scale breach and almost like a high-velocity Colorado River of water coming in. So the first one was on the western side of the industrial canal. I was actually an eyewitness to this one. And then worser conditions opened up when one of those drainage outfall canals breaches a little bit later. And then probably around 7:30, there are two catastrophic breaches on the lower Ninth Ward. And these are the ones you probably remember. And these send a high velocity stream of water into those populated areas. This is 10 minutes of flooding there. You see, that's the same minivan. Okay, so that's how quickly the water is rising. And with all due respect to the poor folks suffering in Harvey and Irma and Maria, the water there was more of a slow, predictable rise. This is, if people didn't evacuate, people drowning in their own living rooms. Okay, 1,500 dead. So now water is pouring in from the east. By a little bit later, there's what the storm surge looks like. All of eastern New Orleans is underwater, and then the drama shifts over to those outfall canals, the drainage canals. Two breaches open up on the London Avenue Canal, and then the earlier one on the 17th Street Canal gets worse. And by mid-morning, the damage was done. 99% of the system held, 1% failed, but that's all it takes. What happened over the next 2 days under clear blue skies was paying the piper for having sunk below sea level. You see how? You have this bloated water on the outside, ruptures the walls to keep it out, and now it starts to pour it in an area that is lower than not just sea level, but the surged sea level. And so for the next 2 days, the water increases, pours in to absolute peak flooding on Wednesday, August 31st. So take a look at this picture here and just kind of wrap your mind about the magnitude of this catastrophe of this city from having to predict it to become the city of the future, now stewing in its own filth. And so the adventures, I'll just wrap up with just a quick recap of the adventures of the past 12 years here. From wreckage to renaissance, and I'm putting the word renaissance in quotes there because it's contested. So Katrina, here's 2005 to the present day, and a diaspora of New Orleanians scattered to the four corners, and a real tough time. The recovery got off to a rocky, contentious start. There were fierce debates of whether some neighborhoods should even come back. Public housing, public health, all these become very hot issues here. But then kind of an unexpected twist here. You all remember the Great Recession, and chances are you, in your various areas, probably suffered more than we did here. First of all, we never had a housing bust in the first place, okay? So you can't, a housing boom. So you can't really bust if you didn't have a boom. It's also the one place that is building new houses, okay? There's $70 billion federal dollars coming down here. New Orleans actually had a pretty low unemployment rate in those 07, 08 years. So it became a pretty good place to ride out the recession. The Saints win the Super Bowl in 2010, and I have to admit, I'm not a sports guy, okay? But I think historians will record this as being a truly significant social and cultural event. It changed the conversation in very, very moving, poignant ways. And it became, you used to have these conversations with, your seatmate on the plane. Where are you from? Oh, and it used to be in 06, 07, where are you from? New Orleans. Oh, yeah, sorry to hear, it's rough, man. These forlorn, head-shaking, pessimistic conversations, that changed it. And it became like, what's going on down there? It's unbelievable. And so we get kind of a new city government and a rising spirit here. But then BP happens, and there's another calamity. But what comes out of this is an increasing sense of, particularly among young progressive millennials, having a tough time given the recession here, and they're discovering what strikes them as this kind of undiscovered Caribbean bohemia where you could expatriate within your own country, okay? And so they start, and so by the turn of the decade here, you start to read this whole different narrative, top 10 list, best place to start, brain magnets, entrepreneurs, art gallery, America's best city for hipsters. I don't know how they quantify this, but America's biggest comeback city, top 10 creative cities. And so by the time of the 10th anniversary in 2015, a lot of both local and external observers were tossing around this word Renaissance. But that got a deserved and tart counterreaction. Gentrification, cultural appropriation, inequity, Renaissance for whom? That there was a population kind of left out of this. And really the Renaissance you're seeing, all the construction you're seeing break down, it's kind of limited to this downtown area, the old higher historic district. And a friend of mine likes to point out that Katrina was not a catastrophe of antiquity, it was a catastrophe of modernity. It was the 20th century neighborhood, it was engineering structures that failed. It was the loss of the natural wetlands that allowed that surge to come closer. So what we have now, thanks to your tax dollars, by the way, $15 billion worth of them, is a much improved, it's no longer called the levee protection system, it's called the Hurricane Storm Surge Risk Reduction System. Which is welcome honesty in risk communication. There's a whole field of risk communication that debates language of how to communicate complex science to the public. I welcome that term, risk reduction system. That's what we should tell folks. There is no protection. You could, at best, reduce risk. And the way it works, you remember where the surge could come in? There's now closable gates and bypass pumps. There's raised levees and flood walls all around. There's the world's largest pumping station on the West Bank. Why do you need a pumping station? The pumping station gets the rainfall accompanying hurricanes out of the bowl, while the gate keeps the outside water from being pushed into the bowl, okay? We also have a kind of Dutch-style storm surge barrier in the east along that funnel, and various gates kind of hardening the perimeter of the city. We call these structural solutions. They are necessary. I welcome the system. I appreciate that you funded it. But I would also point out that it's these sort of impositions of rigidity is what got us into this problem in the first place. We have to keep building it. We built a society around these, but we have to supplement them with non-structural solutions. And what that means is tapping into the world's greatest land building machine here, the Mississippi River, and figuring out a way to get those two precious resources it brings, fresh water and sediment, out of the channel without dislocating a whole bunch of people and lands, and diverting that river, pushing back the saltwater wedge, getting that sediment out, even if we have to dredge it, and siphoning it onto the coastal land surface, rebuild those marshes, rebuild those swamps, push back the saltwater wedge at a pace faster than the sea is rising. And what this would do, you could almost think of natural coastal wetlands as horizontal levees that absorb, they're terrestrial buffers that absorb storm surge, store water. We call them wetlands because they store water. So that reduces its power and its height, and your levee system becomes a backup system. And so these are called non-structural solutions, and they are costly and contentious. There's a lot of folks that are against these in the very areas that are eroding the most. And anyone care to guess why? Oyster and fisherman families. Families dependent, oysters in particular. From their perspective, all that fresh water is wreaking havoc on the salinity regimes that produce the best oysters. They're worried about the pollution from the river. And so talk about dilemmas and paradoxes, that the very things we have to do to save these communities in the long term, 50 years, which is not very long, may undercut the way they make their living next week. Okay? So these are sort of the dilemmas and paradoxes, but we have to figure out a way to supplement both those structural solutions with those non-structural and restore the processes that created this deltaic plain in the first place. And I'll wrap up there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Campanella, on behalf of Team Marcus especially. But thank you very much for your insightful and amazing lecture you gave. Thank you. Applause. So now we are going to do a take two. So, ready? Everyone straight from the set of A Discovery of Witches. We have a message from Teresa Palmer and Matthew Good.
Makes me Diana Bishop.
Doctor.
Dr. Diana Bishop, exactly. Full title.
Full title. He's Matthew Good, actually.
Yes.
I'm Teresa Palmer.
And we're getting on really well.
We are.
And today we are in Cardiff, which is doubling a little bit for Oxford, and we're having a hell of a time, and it's really exciting.
And we're not there.
No, but Deborah is
Yes.
the genius who wrote this, and she really is an amazing woman. And
We want to say hi.
yeah,
Give you guys a shout out. Say thanks for all the support and the
I'm
love.
sorry that we can't be. It's good. The first season, we don't know. We'd love to get to the third season, fourth
Yes.
season, good season.
Spread the word, guys.
Fingers crossed.
Spread it.
Who are you again?
I am Matthew Claremont, the
And-
lovely Matthew Claremont.
That makes me Diana Bishop.
Doctor.
Dr. Diana Bishop, exactly. Full title.
Full title. He's Matthew Good, actually.
Yes.
I'm Teresa Palmer.
And we're getting on really well.
We are.
And today we are in Cardiff, which is doubling a little bit for Oxford, and we're having a hell of a time, and it's really exciting.
And we're not there.
No, but Deborah is
Yes.
the genius who wrote this, and she really is an amazing woman. And
We want to say hi.
yeah,
Give you guys a shout out. Say thanks for all the support and the
I'm
love.
sorry free drink, and they would be free drinks for us. If you're, I don't know if you're just not charging too much.
That's right. Guys, we love you. Say hi to Deborah from us. And mwah. G'day, All Souls,
Sorry.
friends. Oh, and hello there. It's a
Yes.
member of our crew.
We have